Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk about the latest Marvel Cinematic Universe film, Morbius, and let's get into it. So it opens on a helicopter landing near a cave in Costa Rica, where scientist Michael Morbius, who is not a well man, walks with the help of some crutches into a cave to the sort of alarm of the crew of people that have accompanied him there to make sure he gets there and back. And he goes into the cave where apparently there are these bats, which I'm going to guess are vampire bats. And he sort of slices his hand and lets his blood sort of come out. And they fly towards him in sort of a really dramatic way, and the crew kind of scrambles away, and then they cut to a flashback at a hospital in Greece where 10-year-old Michael welcomes his surrogate brother Lucian, whom he renames Milo. And I'm not really clear on what that's about. I'm not familiar with this character in the comics, but it seems from this scene like he's had friends before at this hospital who were either named Milo or that he named Milo. It seems like he's been through a couple of Milos before this new one. Maybe the original friend was called Milo and perhaps he died, and then a second guy, he named him Milo, you're the new Milo, and he passed away. So this Milo is like the third Milo at least. And he says, no, my name's Lucian. But anyways, he calls him Milo. And they bond over their shared illness and their, wish to be cured. Their adoptive father and hospital director, Nicholas, arranges for Michael to attend a school in New York while he focuses on caring for Milo. Before that, though, there's a scene where they show that there are some bullies around, and that these two kids have to be careful because the bullies are kind of treating them like jerks. But anyway, he goes off to school. And while he's away, in fact, he and Milo exchange letters. And at one point, these bullies take one of the letters away from Milo. And there's a scene where he's out there on crutches trying to get it back, and they kick the tar out of him. And, Nicholas has to come and sort of rescue him. But then we jump to 25 years later, which would appear to be just about the present, around the time of the most recent Spider-Man film, and we'll get to that. Anyway, Michael publicly declines a Nobel Prize for his work with synthetic blood. He's created synthetic blood, and it's apparently been very life-saving for people, which is great. Michael's colleague, Dr. Martin Bancroft, discovers that he was in possession of dozens of vampire bats, the ones that he got from Costa Rica, and that he's acquired them in the hope of splicing their genes with his to cure his condition. After informing Nicholas and Milo of his planned experiment, Michael receives funding to outfit a private mercenary vessel in international waters so that they aren't breaking any particular nation's laws, I guess. While the cure that he comes up with works, it transforms him into a vampire. And when the mercenaries on the ship that were sort of running the ship that they had created this lab on get a little jerky, he totally flips out and kills them in a vampiric rage, which was very cool to see. The way they did it, I thought, was just fantastic. He drains them all of their blood, and in the process, the good Dr. Bancroft is wounded. When his bloodlust subsides and he regains his senses, he erases all the CCTV footage, being horrified by it, so that, anyone who comes across the boat can't immediately know that he was involved. He then sends out a mayday so that the boat can be towed to shore and his friend can be saved, but he jumps overboard and goes away. He returns to New York and discovers that he has superhuman strength, speed, reflexes, and echolocation. He subsists on synthetic blood until it gradually starts to not work to keep his bloodlust at bay and to keep him from being sick. FBI agents Simon Stroud and Al Rodriguez investigate Michael's victims and deduce his involvement. Milo learns that Michael is cured, but becomes furious when Michael refuses to cure him as well, which he does because he doesn't want Milo, who, by the way, is played by Matt Smith excellently in this film, to have to deal with what he's dealing with. Yeah, you'll be cured. Yeah, you'll have cool abilities, but you have this insatiable bloodlust, and the fake blood isn't going to be effective long term, and you're going to have to start having human blood, and you don't want that. So I'm not going to cure you. I'm not going to give you the cure. Then, while checking on a hospitalized Bancroft, Michael finds a dead nurse drained of her blood. Believing he was responsible, he attempts to escape before being cornered and arrested. In prison, he's visited by Milo, who offers to use his wealth to free him. Upon realizing that Milo took the cure, which they don't show you how that happened, one assumes he went to the lab and figured out where it was and took it himself, injected himself, and that he, in fact, killed the nurse, Michael escapes to confront him. Milo, of course, doesn't care what he did. He's not at all repentant about it, and he, in fact, confesses to having done it, and he urges Michael to embrace his powers, embrace what he's become, the way he has. Unwilling to hurt his brother, after they do kind of fight a little bit, Michael flees. He meets Bancroft to explain what Milo has done before acquiring a new lab in kind of an interesting way and developing an anticoagulant to stop and kill Milo, because Milo's nuts. He's out there killing people. He also plans to use it on himself, since he will become unable to resist his bloodlust shortly. Stroud and Rodriguez find footage of one of Milo's attacks and release it to the media. Nicholas recognizes Milo and goes to see him, pleading with him to stop. But, of course, Milo is unhinged, and this makes him angry. And I guess he's always thought that Nicholas has preferred Michael, so he mortally wounds Nicholas and forces him to call Michael. Michael arrives. He watches Nicholas die in his arms. While in the meantime, Milo goes after Bancroft and forces her to call out to Michael, which he hears with his echolocation and tracks where they are. And by the time he gets there, she also dies in his arms, and he drinks her blood, but to power himself up. But before that, he passes some of his blood onto her. He goes to kiss her, and I don't know if he did it deliberately or if he cut himself somehow, in his mouth with his teeth and by accident, and some blood just drips into her mouth, but she ends up receiving some of his blood. He then confronts Milo. They have another pretty cool fight. He ends up summoning an army of bats, Michael does, to keep Milo down, and while he's down, he jumps on him and injects him with the anticoagulant. Milo dies, and Michael flies off with the bats, mourning the loss of Dr. Bancroft, whom apparently he loved, as well as apparently Milo/Lucian, who, was his good friend for a long time and who he cared about. Unbeknownst to him, Bancroft is revived by her newly developed vampiric powers, which she got, obviously, from his blood, which, you knew was going to happen as soon as you saw the drop go in her mouth, but it's fine. Apparently in the comics, she's his love interest, and she is a vampire, and she has a whole history in the comics that I read up a little bit on. So, that's nothing new. All the superheroes have their love interests, and she's his. So it's not surprising that she doesn't actually die. Anyway, before the movie ends, well, the credits start to roll, but then there's a post-credit scene or mid-credit scene. Actually, there's both. And they involve Adrian Toomes, who, of course, is the Vulture. And we see him, arriving sort of magically into Michael's universe by virtue of a spell. Now, this, of course, is the spell from the most recent Spider-Man film, cast by Doctor Strange. And for some reason, he gets released from this prison cell that he just magically appears in. Apparently, in that universe, he's not a villain, so he just gets released. He then dons his Vulture outfit, which I guess he made a new one in this universe. I don't know. And he ends up having a meeting with Michael, and he suggests that they form a team. So we know that Vulture is not a good guy. So any team he would want to form would be a team that went on to be up to no good, which suggests that Morbius is to become a villain. Now, again, I'm not familiar with the character. My impression from things I've heard over the years is that he's more of an anti-hero than a villain or a hero, but I don't actually know. So that's kind of cool, actually, because if they make a Morbius 2, or if Morbius shows up in any of the MCU films that are coming, or gets a series, I will be surprised as to how things develop, as opposed to sort of anticipating seeing stuff I already know. So that's actually kind of cool for me. It also means apparently that, good, bad, or indifferent, he intends to stay alive and didn't take his own anticoagulant death shot thing. So I don't know, something convinced him to keep going. How he's going to do that without killing people remains to be seen. And as I said, maybe he no longer intends to not kill people. So we'll have to see. I really liked this movie. I liked it better than the most recent Spider-Man film. I really did. That movie got a lot of hype. Everybody thought it was fantastic. I was like, eh. You know, if you saw my review of it, okay, good movie, whatever. This movie was really good, I thought. It's gotten reviews both great and awful, which is kind of strange. I don't think it was a fantastically mind-blowing film, but it was solid. I think this was a solid 3.5, 4-star film. Some of the critiques have been that the characters are kind of surface. They're not so much one-dimensional, but not very deep. There's not a lot there. I guess you would call that surface. Some of the critiques, one of the critiques is that the character relationships aren't fleshed out. They're kind of just thrown at you. You know, these two people are surrogate brothers. This guy and, you know, and this guy and this woman work together and they like each other or whatever. And it's kind of, that ball's kind of already rolling, and they don't do a whole lot of establishing their connection. I can't say that those critiques are not valid. The characters are pretty paint by numbers, pretty surface, but, you know, I don't know about now. I haven't read comics in a long time regularly, but back in the day, that was, you know, the villains were kind of one-dimensional, and the heroes were, you know, a little less one-dimensional, but very narrowly defined. And only in recent years have comic book characters become more literary characters, more serious literary characters than they once were. So I think the characterization of these characters fits perfectly with a comic book movie. There's sort of, you know, not at all, very, very little nuance exists with these characters, if any. Matt Smith's character is sort of a mustache twirling villain. There's no complexity to him, but it's fine. I think it works well. He's just a bad guy. That's just it. He's a bad dude. He's had a crappy life. He's been kicked around a lot, and he has a chip on his shoulder because he somehow thinks that Michael was the favorite at home. And so he's off the rails, and he's just unapologetically gone over to the evil side. And that's fine. These films don't have to be Shakespeare to be really good. Morbius's character is, you know, painted pretty much as a paragon, somebody that wouldn't ever hurt anybody that he didn't absolutely have to. And, you know, again, this idea where they're super, you know, comic book heroes are flawed is relatively a new thing, and it's great. I think some comic book heroes, they can do that I'm a hero but I'm flawed thing, and it works really well. Batman, Iron Man, Black Widow, even Superman to some extent, depending on the version, have been depicted in latter years as great heroes, but that they have flaws. They're not perfect. And that's cool because it's easier to relate with characters like that because none of us are perfect. So it makes them more human, it makes them more realistic, and it's great. But having a strictly comic book, one-dimensional sort of I'm awesome and I don't have any flaws character can be cool too. Because sometimes that's what you want. You want a character that's above reproach, that's a paragon. So I think in this, it wouldn't always work, but I think in this movie, it worked. Michael Morbius is just this earnest guy who's had a disease, and he goes about his life one way, trying to help people, trying to cure people, cure himself. The other character, Milo Lucian, kind of goes through life just sort of existing, not really doing anything. He doesn't have the scientific ability, so he's just kind of living through life or surviving his life. And when this event occurs where this cure comes up and it gives them super abilities, they each respond to that differently. And, I think that speaks to the human condition. So the fact that the differences aren't realistic because the characters are so extreme on the good bad scale in different directions is fine. It doesn't wreck the movie. Yeah, I think this was a good movie. I like the characters. The action sequences were crazy. The special effects were crazy. It just was really good. The love story could have been a little heavier for me. There could have been more to that. It's kind of not really there until the end. You know that they care for each other, but it's not really a love story. You don't quite know what their connection is because it's just established that they know each other and that they're friendly and that they've been working together for a while. You don't really get any history on that. And it would have been good if there were a little bit more of that. But the fact that there isn't, to me, doesn't take away from this film. So I enjoyed it very much. I look forward to seeing more with this character in a sequel or appearing somewhere else in the MCU. I'm kind of bummed that Milo Lucian actually dies because I liked Matt Smith in that role. He's generally great, and I thought he did a good job with his character, and I would have liked to have seen more of the character. Maybe he's not dead, who knows? But if in fact he is, I'm kind of bummed about that. I'd like to see him come back, actually. But that's it. That's all I have to say about the movie. I urge you to see it. It's really good. I'll be back with more movie reviews in the future. Until then, I wish you peace and long life.